passion for what you're doing. This rings true because it's so hard that if you don't, any rational person would give up. It's really hard, and you have to do it over a sustained period of time. So if you don't love it, and if you're not having fun doing it, you're gonna give up.
So welcome to another episode of John's Entitled Podcast, a partner of MoshPitNation.com. This episode's guest is it's a good one. It's Mr. Mark Tremonti of Alter Bridge of Tremonti, and you might have heard of the first band he was in, Creed. And with me, as always, from a slew of other podcasts, is Mr. Daniel Terry. How are you doing this afternoon?
I am doing fantastic, man. I'm coming down off of the Cannibal Corpse high I was on. Or maybe it was a Cannabis Corpse high. That was confusing when I was telling Siri what to listen to. I kind of kept alternating back and forth between Cannabis Corpse and Cannibal Corpse. But, I'm getting some of that aggression out of my system. I'm coming down and, getting ready to enjoy this episode about Mark Tremonti.
Yeah, it was a pretty interesting thing, the way that this chat ended up happening. Obviously, Louder Than Life didn't happen. And this is an interview that I had scheduled initially, or tried to schedule for that. And thankfully, the publicist had actually asked if I would be willing to do a phoner if the interview in person wasn't able to pan out. And so I obviously said yes. Didn't hear anything. Festival gets canceled, and I just kind of assumed that was it. I think maybe I had sent a follow-up email that was like, hey, if there's any time for Mark to do some press, love to be considered. And then magically I get an email out of the blue that's like, hey, Mark's got a little gap of time tomorrow to do some press. If you are interested, let me know. And of course I hopped right on that. Required me to move my lunch around a little bit, so nothing like having to get into a tiny little broom closet, basically, to do this interview, which I think really puts where a podcast is in perspective. Because, I do this in a pretty nice little office here in my house, typically. Or, if I have to do them at work, usually I get to utilize our conference room that we don't really use a whole lot. But I was kind of booted out of there, and the next quietest place I could find was a little closet in our break room.
He's doing it for you guys. John is always mildly inconvenienced in order to get these interviews out for you guys every week.
Yeah, you think you can hear some of the bagging machines in the background going pch, pch, as I was talking.
Well, yeah, they were actually working.
Yes, they were, and so was I. But it was kind of funny. I wasn't sure if I was going to mention this, but I think it's been something I've shared quite a bit, so I thought I would laugh about it with for those who maybe want a good laugh. Leading up to this, I was looking for some interviews that Mark maybe had done to kind of see if the line of questioning I had already been answered or not. And
oh, man.
In my digging, I found an interview from I think
2016.
2016.
Yeah.
And to be fair, the person who did the interview is from Sweden, but, not for nothing, I talked to a Swede last week who was able to talk just fine for over an hour with me. And so I feel like that excuse of, there's a language barrier, I'm going to kind of throw out the window a little bit, but it was single-handedly one of the most awkward interviews, quote-unquote, I have ever heard, so much so that I shared it with Toomey, who I ended up finding out was also doing an interview with Mark, and I said it to Dan right away, and yeah.
Yeah. I listened to that interview before I actually listened to your interview, John, so it was really a good example of how to not interview somebody, and I would say, because I've got a couple highlights, if you don't mind me sharing them. Yeah, what's cooking? The other one was, so you're in 3 bands, Creed, Alter Bridge, and Tremonti. So, what's the difference between the 3 bands? And I was really hoping he was going to be like, nothing. They're basically all identical. It's stat singing on every single one of them. And that one was funny. The whole confusion about, I guess in other countries, they refer to television shows as serials.
Yes.
So she's like, if you were on a TV serial, what would you be? And he's like, what? And she's like, TV serial. And he's like, what? And she's like, TV serial. And he's like, what? And then she's like, what, do you not call it a TV serial in America? You know, like a television show. And he's like, oh, yeah. And then he's like, I don't know. I guess I would, just be in a happy TV show. But the funniest question she asked to me was like, who's the mom in the studio?
Oh my God.
And again, you're talking about this dude's solo band. And it's just funny that instead of like, because I've definitely heard the term band dad before.
Yes.
But like, I've never heard anybody refer to like, who is the mother in the studio. And so I listened to another interview that they did with Gojira, like, a couple of weeks later, and asked like pretty much the exact same questions. And she starts up the interview. She goes, "What's up?" And he goes, "Airplanes." And she's like, "What?" And he's like, "Airplanes." And she's like, "What? I don't understand. What are you even saying right now?" And he's all like, "Never mind. It was just like a joke." It's so funny.
Yeah, it was a very interesting. And the crazy thing is, it's literally just the phone call. It's like 16 minutes, but I swear when you're in the throes of the conversation, it's like, oh, God, it feels like at least 30 or 40 minutes have gone by. And you're like, could this get any worse? To be completely fair, I'm sure there are people who think what I do sucks. So, I mean, it's all relative, but it's one of those things sometimes in doing your prep that sometimes you can stumble across some things that are unapologetically funny that aren't even trying to be.
Did you see that one? There's a really awkward one with Kill Switch Engage.
Yes,
and
so
it's
I asked
person interview.
I asked Mike when I had him on a while ago if that was a work, and he said yes.
Oh, he said that was a fake interview?
Yeah, that they had like pre-set it up to be like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that the other day. Like, if we just did really shitty interviews
On purpose.
If we'd like become known for that, like. Or like you're really professional, like you've got this track record, and then you bring me on there, and I'm like, so how exactly big is your dick? Like just questions like that, and probably get a lot of subscribers, but it would feel kind of disrespectful, I think, to the artists.
Yes,
because I worry about that so much. Like when people, I heard an interview with the lead singer of Coalesce a while back, and he was saying how like. Back in the late 90s, when you would do an interview, you'd have really no idea. There was no way to go and check out the publication or anything. It's like you're just on a phone call with somebody you've never talked to before. He's like, and we're talking to this guy, and then all of a sudden I realize it's not a real interview. It's a guy doing a really bad Arnold Schwarzenegger impression, asking us the most ridiculous shit that he can think of to ask. And he's like, that happened more often than it didn't happen back in the late 90s.
That sucks. Yeah, I mean, the one thing in kind of shifting it from, slagging on other interviewers or whatever is, with doing this interview, I didn't really want to ask too much about Creed, and nor really Alter Bridge, but I kind of wanted to get a nice, all-encompassing, wide array interview in 25 minutes or so. And I feel like I did a pretty good job with that. Talking about the new Tremonti record, A Dying Machine, the concept between it, and the book that he put out to coincide with the release, future plans for it, or, re-releasing the album in a chronological order to go with the story. I mean, that was kind of an interesting thing he was saying about how, like, he had a different track listing and then was like, oh, it didn't make for a good record, which I thought was weird, because usually it seems like when you're writing these things, you kind of write the music to go in order like that, to go with the story, not just to kind of be like, oh, here's all the music, and just kind of flop it around to make it sound like a good record from start to finish, like have good flow.
Well, I think sequencing is extremely important, though, from the perspective of a record. And if you're the kind of person that's just been putting out records your whole life and haven't really done like a big overlapping concept like that, I can see how there might be a little bit of a disconnect between how a record flows musically versus a story being told in a certain order. So like I totally understand why it was done like that. We just got done talking about a band on my other podcast that was doing this huge like trilogy of albums. And one of the things that we said is that, like, yeah, it tells a story, but it doesn't flow well at all. Like, these songs should have been rearranged, and made, to flow well as a musical album, because for the most part, I mean, the concepts are great, like the overarching story, like I thought that was cool, but I also don't want to be, like, if I'm driving in my car, don't want to be interrupted by the concept. And so whenever you select your tracks to be sequenced in a certain order, I can totally understand going with the more musical approach, especially if you're a guy like Mark Tremonti, that's basically eats and shits music, I could definitely take him. I could definitely see him taking that route.
Yeah. I don't know if that's the words I would have used to describe that.
Well, he does. He eats and shits music. It's fine. I didn't say he makes shit music. I just said he eats and shits music.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get into presenting you with my conversation with Mark Tremonti, and we will talk to you afterwards. So I had the pleasure of taking a lunch break with Mark Tremonti, getting to talk about his latest album, A Dying Machine, which is out now via Napalm Records. How are you doing today?
Doing great. Yourself?
Doing good. Having a liquid lunch at Gatorade right now.
Oh, nice.
So one of the first things that kind of stands out to me about your solo output is 3 records in 3 years, basically. And, for a lot of people, 1 record every year and a half to 2 is sufficient for them. And so I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about your work flow of just the creative output of doing that. Is that something that, you kind of set out to do, just, always staying busy and wanting to try to put out a record every year?
I think it's just a matter of having, I feel like I'm in a race to the finish to get the ideas that I've written out there. So I don't, so I'm not an angry old man sitting on a bunch of material that I never got, that I worked so hard on that I never got to release. So it's, I'm thankful that I have these different projects to be able to get all this stuff out, or else it would have just disappeared.
In the day and age where you hear stories of, people, like there's a band like Taproot who are actually putting out a B-sides record that's 8 CDs long of demos and a lot of material in various versions of recordings. At this point, I would assume with the 3 albums you have, Alter Bridge, and even if you go back to the Creed stuff, I would imagine there's not a whole lot that's left, on a hard drive somewhere. Is that an accurate statement?
I mean, I have a massive amount of material that of my own stuff, but yeah, there's not a lot of B-sides sitting around anymore from Creed. I think we've released everything. I think the record label pretty much released what they had, even without us saying that we wanted to. I think they just put it out. But I think we've released all the Alter Bridge recorded tracks at this point, and all the Tremonti tracks. So, but like that being said, I've got, it would take a long time to organize it, but I've got tons of material kind of sitting around.
So we can possibly expect a Tremonti album next year?
No, next year will be focused on Alter Bridge. I'm writing that record right now, and we go in the studio March and April.
I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about the collaboration of A Dying Machine, the album, and A Dying Machine, the novel that you put out with it. Sadly, I don't have that book, so I had to find a friend to kind of explain a lot about the book to me so I can kind of draw some parallels. But, that's quite an undertaking as well. I mean, like I said, a lot of people would be just happy with being like, I got an album, it's done, thank Lord, like, on to the next thing. So what inspired you to want to go the extra route with this record and create a companion piece for it?
There's just certain things in my life that I really, really get into, and one of them is reading. And I'm a huge fan of authors, huge fans of taking these journeys that are created in the mind. And I've always had this bucket list item of getting a book published. And when I came up with the concept for the record, I decided it was the perfect time to try to tackle that. And, I thought if I wrote the book and it was no good, I'd squash it and not put it out. But that's such a fun time putting it together, and I'm so happy and proud of it. And thank God I partnered up with John Shirley, who helped me fast track it, and he was a great partner, creative partner with me, and I'm very happy with the way it turned out.
Were you a fan of John's work with like doing the BioShock stuff at all, or is that how you found him?
No, when I first started putting the concept, putting pen to paper, I figured, no, I'm just going to do this myself. And then I realized just how slow going it would be. And there was no way in the world I'd be able to finish by the time this record cycle was over. The only way I could do it is if I partnered up with somebody. So I was going to look at first just in the local yellow pages for ghostwriters, just somebody to help me. I would organize ideas and have them help me fast track it. But, for a minute, I'm like, who knows who you're going to get doing this? So I realized that my agent was just, his company was bought by UTA, United Talent Agency, and they have an entire literary department and movie department. So I called him, and I got, talked to the head of their literary department, and I told him the story, and he sent me a first batch of authors, and they were all great authors. It's just none of them really had the voice I wanted the story to speak through. And got another batch, same thing. Everybody was great, but just kind of not the vibe. And then finally I came across John Shirley, and right off the bat, I loved it. It was perfect. John is, he knows, where the future, he's a specialist in where the technology is headed. And he speaks, does the TED Talks about singularity and what's to come in 50 years or 100 years. And, so when I would explain the story, he's like, well, that's actually plausible. There's a company that's developing that technology, and it's 40 years from now, you're going to be seeing it. And he had a way of explaining my ideas and making them seem more plausible, and because they actually, a lot of them are.
Something that was kind of interesting in gathering as much of the information as I could from the book, in conjunction to the record, I kind of got a greater sense of like a rock opera, I guess, for lack of a better term. And it made me wonder, if you would ever want to, and I know this would be probably a bigger financial undertaking than you're maybe able to do currently with Tremonti, but if you would ever want to do kind of like a rock opera, like a live thing, like maybe like an Operation Mindcrime type thing with this down the road, if you could.
If it, I think the only way that would happen is if, the book became a success, which turned into a TV show or a movie, and then all of a sudden it's this cult thing where people would want to see that. I'd hate to just throw it on people, come see my rock opera, and then have people say, what the hell did I sign up for? It would have to be something that turned into a success before we thought about, and I think it would be kind of cheesy to do this stage acting musical kind of thing. A few people have brought up this could be a Broadway presentation. No, I don't think I'm the right guy for that kind of thing. In a perfect world, the book does well, and maybe some director gets a deal with Netflix and creates a TV series, which would be probably the coolest thing that could ever happen to a guy like me.
Interestingly enough, I was thinking about the sort of just the parallels between. Shit, I lost my train of thought. Hold on. Where was I going with that? Oh, thinking about how with the album and the book kind of being this entity and kind of talking about a greater sense of story, I kind of wondered if you had ever thought of maybe redoing the album and kind of putting it in the chronological order of that the story would go with.
Yeah, I actually thought about doing a special edition that did that, and I wanted to make the record flow like the story did, but it would have been a real weird listen, especially if you didn't know what the plot was, you just listened to a record, it would be a very strange flow to the album dynamically. But I might just do something as simple as just doing a Apple Music or Spotify playlist that has the proper order.
Kind of in shifting gears a little bit, I was actually listening to a podcast, Doc Coyle from Bad Wolves podcast, and his band announced that they're going to go play with Nickelback, and a lot of the fans started, the band's fans started shitting on, playing with Nickelback. Why would you do that? All this kind of stuff. And when I was listening to your interview with Josta that you did a little while ago, and you were talking about how basically that Alter Bridge, and I would say even Tremonti, is bigger overseas because Creed never went over there. And there wasn't this kind of stigma attached to either of those projects because of Creed. And looking at your comment about that and thinking about what Doc is saying on his podcast about how basically, there's all these people who talk about this band sucks and this is the worst band, and you see all these lists that, sites will run and so forth. And it kind of made me wonder, and I don't think I've ever heard you be asked this or answer this question, but as one of the first bands I can really think of in the internet age where people would just slag on you for really nothing, just an opinion, and maybe a vocal minority one, because having seen you guys a couple of times, I can definitely tell you arenas were full, so someone's full of shit. But all that being said, have you when you see people slag on a band like Nickelback or whatever, does it kind of make you, I don't know if resentful is the word, but just kind of like, because of this culture where people are saying shit, it can and does kind of have an impact on those that are being talked about negatively. Like, it impacts maybe their financials and so forth. Like, is that, I don't know if I'm asking the question the way I necessarily want it to come out, but, it was something I've just kind of been thinking about today in listening to, like I said, Doc's thing, and then listening to how you made the comment about, since you never toured Europe, you didn't have this bad shit on it, on, Alter Bridge and so forth.
So do I commiserate kind of with the comments? Yeah, I mean, it's, I went through it, and when I was in it, it really pissed me off to see anything, negative about the band. But, even like the biggest stars in the world, you take like a Michael Jackson, if you want to have tens of millions of fans, you're going to have a million haters out there as well, no matter who you are. So the bigger you are, the bigger target you have on your back. And, especially when you have a ton of success, people love the underdog. People hate the guy on top or the girl on top. And, it's tough to stay on top. Even just yesterday, my song came on the radio, and it was my kids flicked through the stations, and a Taylor Swift song came on, and, oh, this song sucks. I'm like, oh, Taylor Swift's no good. I'm like, what are you talking about? Do you know what talent it takes to fill stadiums around the world and keep on writing these songs and perform to the level she does, and have Mick Jagger come on the stage with you, and have this star come on the stage with you, and you hold your own against all these people? It takes a lot. So for people just to slag on the top people I think it's wrong. Try to, take the bitter metal guy that plays in his bedroom. You get up and play in a stadium in front of that many people and see how difficult it is, because it's not just sitting in a chair in your room in a perfect little environment. It's a lot of other factors.
Yeah, most definitely. And it, I know, like I said, in listening to your talk with Jost, I think he even hit on the fact that it probably made you work harder and appreciate more of what you've been able to do with Tremonti and with Alter Bridge at this point. And, a common thing, too, I've heard you say in other interviews is that, you look at Creed as kind of like, it was one of your first bands, but it just happened to be the band that took off. And I feel like that's kind of got to be weird. Like, looking back, have you thought about just how interesting that is? Like, one of your first bands that you did in your early 20s just became this big thing, but it's still the benchmark that people compare you to, even though you have such a wealth of material that clearly shows that you've grown as a person and as a musician since then.
Yeah, it's funny, over in Europe it's different, but over here, I always tell the story, like I'll go down to the local Great Clips or whatever to get a haircut, and they're like, so what do you do? I'm a musician. Yeah, you in a band? Yeah, I'm in a band. What band? I like Tremonti. Like, oh, I don't know, Tremonti. Alter Bridge? No. Creed? Oh, Creed, I love that. In America, that's I'm known for Creed, but over in Europe it's different. So it's it sometimes it's it doesn't make me angry, but sometimes it's just a little disappointing when people have no idea what I've done since Creed, because I've done more outside of Creed than I ever did in Creed. I've done more records outside of the band. I've had a lot more years outside of that band, but that just happened to be my biggest success. But I feel like that was a band that I was in when I was kind of a kid, and I think I've grown a lot since then, and hopefully when my kids look back at the legacy or whatnot, they'll see the other stuff I've done as well.
Kind of shifting gears a little bit to Alter Bridge, I gotta say it was kind of interesting. I think if I read correctly, you had used a 7-string guitar on this last Alter Bridge record. Is that something you've been playing around with a lot more, is using a non-6-string guitar?
No, just that song. I'm not really a fan of 7-string guitars. I figured I'd try to do something different for the record and did that song. And now when we play that song live, I hate playing the 7-string. So I don't know if I'll go back to it. It might just be that song.
I was gonna say, so no Tremonti PRS 7-string guitar coming out in production?
Absolutely not.
Speaking a little bit to the guitar playing as well, something that I've always thought was interesting, and now with these, what is it, the Steve Vai Axe Shredder, whatever, you have all these tours that are various people from all demographics of the guitar playing spectrum. And I mean, you're no slouch on guitar, and I've always been kind of surprised that I've never seen you on any of these. Like, do people just not approach you to do any of these things, or?
No, I've gotten approached to do it. It's just, I'm always just touring around the clock, so it's hard to set it, every time I put out a record, I've got a certain window to be able to promote it. And, Joe Satriani's camp had reached out to do it. He has this camp in January, with all the top players that go out there and teach, these people sign up for a weekend or whatnot. And he asked me to be one of their instructors, and it's tough because I have a tour, scheduled in January, and I just, we plan so far ahead. It's tough to carve out a given time because you never know what's going to pop up.
Down the road, would that be something you would like to do? Because I feel like that would really, I think it would put you in a completely different light for a lot of people that probably, for whatever reason, don't know how proficient at playing and all the various styles you actually can play in.
I mean, it would definitely be an experience for sure. I'm not going to lie, I'd probably be a little bit intimidated to get up there and play with Steve Vai and Joe Satriani every night, but in a perfect world, before that would ever happen, I'd get to sit down and jam with them, become friendly with them before I'd feel that pressure.
It would be really interesting to see. I would definitely enjoy seeing you in that kind of environment and just kind of letting loose more than you do now.
Hanging on for dear life.
Do you actually kind of jam that way? I mean, it seems like I haven't really heard a whole lot of stories. You just kind of really free-flowing, kind of going, like off the cuff like that. Is that something you tend to do, like, at home?
Oh, yeah, that's what I do most of the time. It's just my live, you got to play the songs from the record or everybody gets pissed, So it's a lot of times, if we do, we're on tour and we do a song that we haven't done in a while, we got to learn it that day and play it that night. I'll just improvise the solo instead of relearning it. Sound checks, we do a lot of doing a lot of improvising, and at home, when I pick up guitar, I improvise right off the bat. I think the best way to improve on the guitar is to improvise, and it's just something that everybody needs to develop, and it's tough to be to never make a mistake when you're doing that, but it's part of the excitement and the magic of it.
Yeah, most definitely. I've kind of wondered too, what has been, just out of a jam session of just kind of free flow writing, what has been one of the songs that has come out of it that has impressed you the most? Like, where you're like, wow, I didn't know that was coming.
I think when we were writing Fortress and we were working out Cry of Achilles, that kind of came together on the spot, and it, that was a great capture, lightning in the bottle moment.
kind of talking about the last Alter Bridge release, the live at Royal Albert Hall, excuse me. A lot of bands I don't think can pull off getting to play with an orchestra, because I feel like it's so hard. Like, there's so many moving parts that, like, any mistake is just gonna kind of throw it off the rails. Like, and I think it's been very interesting listening to that record the last couple of days, and just being able to actually hear all the nuance in the live setting. Like, even hearing the brass and hearing, everything kind of in a good pair of headphones. How much attention was actually paid to the mixing after the fact, because it seems like that's, your sound guy, or the sound person as a whole, did a fucking great job, but beyond that, I would assume there was a little bit more aftercare that had to be kind of done to make sure all the levels were good after the fact for, like, a CD.
Yeah, no, Brian Sperber mixed it for us, and he did the, the Heineken Music Hall and the Live at the O2. He mixes all of our live stuff, and I think that's where he really excels at that. And he flew out to the show, made sure all of his line sends from all the instruments sounded great and were recorded properly. And he's just a master at what he does. So it turned out great because he put a lot of work into it. It took him twice as long because instead of mixing 4 guys, he had to mix 56 guys, and girls. So it was, but that's his specialty, and he killed it. Like you said, you can hear the clarity with all the instruments, and some songs there's more space than others to really hear the orchestra, but I think he did a good job of mixing it all.
When working with an orchestra like that and kind of hearing a sort of reimagining or a reinterpretation, I guess would be a better way of saying it, of some of the songs that you've had for a long time, were you kind of impressed with what was kind of presented in the spaces that the orchestra was able to play in?
Yeah, absolutely. At first when we were putting this together, I think we all thought we were going to have to spend a ton of time working on what they were putting to our music. And when we got the first few, I think Cry of Achilles was actually the first thing we heard, and we were blown away with it. And I figured I'd be like, that violin's doing something that's irritating me. Let's change that. Or this is doing something, I don't like that oboe. Let's change that. But when we were done, we just kind of sat back and said, this is going to be killer, And after we heard the third or fourth song, we were like, you know what? It's in your hands. You guys are killing it. There's nothing we can say that's going to improve it. Let's just go with it. And when we thought we'd have time to rehearse these things through and through. At the end of the day, we rehearsed each song once.
Oh, boy.
And went up there and performed it and recorded it. So what you're seeing is pretty much the second time we played these songs.
Kind of in wrapping up, I gotta say, like, the live album, it's really crazy to, especially, I'm thinking of Open Your Eyes, like the last song you guys close it out with, and hearing the crowd sing, Miles's, like, oh parts so loudly. And, like, it gives me goosebumps every time I listen to it, because it's one of those things where, I don't know, it's that intangible thing that makes going to live shows so amazing, because it's a shared experience, yet it's unique unto every crowd. And it makes me wonder, like, does that kind of go away after that maybe happens night in and night out for you?
No, I mean, that night, that was one of those goosebumps every song kind of performance. It was hearing that orchestra supporting your songs that you become so familiar with, that were your babies that you've created, and hear all that production put behind it was probably one of the most exciting performances that I've ever done in my life. So I was definitely chill bumping it all night long.
I can't imagine you go to bed very quickly after that show.
No, it was time that, the first night, it was a 2-night performance. So the first night, we had to be good. We were very happy after the first night, because we're like, we can do this. It sounded good. Now we're comfortable. Let's kill it the second night. And the DVD is pretty much the second night. Okay. I think in its entirety. And when we played that second night, all the pressure was off, because we knew we already had a one-time run through it live, and I think we all just felt comfortable and we relaxed, and I think that's when the magic came out.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a great keepsake for those who haven't seen it or don't own it. Wrapping up, you're starting your tour here pretty quickly. European tour. It starts on November 4th in Portugal and ends December 10th in the Netherlands. What are you most looking forward to on this European run?
It's just it's our home for this band and Alter Bridge. It's where the fans come out in the largest numbers and support the bands the most. So it's I just every night over there I look forward to. I think we have our key markets over there that show the most support. But that being said, we love each and every show.
And then lastly, where can people find you and or the band online?
You can go to marktremonti.com or fret12.com for all the information on. We do VIP packages. We do guitar clinics and bass clinics and drum clinics and meet and greet stuff and all the tour dates. So it's all on there.
And I always like to end these out with a song. So what would you like me to end it out to?
Let's do Dying Machine, title track.
There we go. Well, Mark, thank you again for taking the time, and enjoy the rest of your day, and safe travels on the tour.
Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you. So that was my conversation with Mark Tremonti of Alter Bridge, Tremonti, and Creed. And I had a lot of fun with that. Like I said in the intro, I knew I was going to get about 20, 25 minutes with him, and I wanted to make the most of it. And I really thought, I thought every section of things we talked about, whether it be, the new album and, kind of him wanting to write something a little differently, kind of take a different approach to the writing, to even, I didn't want to ask a ton about Creed because I feel like that's just been beaten to death, and, I'm not going to be like, yo, when's the new Creed reunion happening, or, any of this kind of stuff, but it's interesting to look at this day and age now where you get all these things where it's like, oh, top 10 worst hard rock bands, or things like this. You see these stupid lists, and in the day and age now where basically we have, I'm sure you've seen these pieces coming out. The one from Pitchfork, I think, on Greta Van Fleet.
Yeah,
where basically this dude just trashes the band and the fans and all this kind of stuff. And then I just in a Facebook group that I'm in of media people, someone shared this thing written by, I want to say it's the Washington Post, I could be wrong, but a reputable credible news source, or news site, I should say. And basically it was this person trashing Post Malone, saying that Post Malone is the poster child, no pun intended, of just a movement of culture, of youth culture, that's just lazy and all this kind of stuff, and is famous for nothing, and all these kind of things. And it's as you read this really well worded, well put together op piece, it just reads like somebody who doesn't get it, which is fine. You can not get things and have an opinion on it. That's fine. But to literally have them slag on the fans that are in attendance, slag on the artists performing, all this kind of stuff, it's we've made comments before, and actually it's something that I've been getting, you and I have been getting lauded for from the Juggalo community for our Twisted episode, and people just being I think it's really great that you two are putting, you're self-admittedly not big into the scene, but just because maybe it's not something you're super familiar with or that you love, that you're not also going to slag on it either. And to me, it's that's the approach that this writer didn't have on this thing about Post Malone and its fans and all that kind of stuff. And so I ended up making a comment on this Facebook thing after spending the 10 minutes reading this long article, and I was I went to go do a show review for Janet Jackson, and I was starting to write things it's really terrible that she's lip syncing so obviously, and that the band's shrouded in blackness, they're not up in the forefront, or a person a pop person like Justin Timberlake, the band's kind of at the epicenter of everything, because they are a part of the show. And so it was kind of one of those things, I started kind of being negative about the experience, and then my wife just kind of tapped me on the shoulder because she saw some of the notes I was making. She goes, people don't come to shows like this because they want to see the band or because they care about if they're lip syncing. They just come here to have a good fucking time and hear the songs being performed. And when I kind of stopped for a second and looked around and just saw, you can tell there are people probably who don't go to shows very often, and this is maybe the one show they go to all year.
Yeah.
and they're having a good time and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, fuck, I guess that's really what it's about, is to have a good time and to let go and just have fun. And the fact that, you know, someone's sitting here slamming on Post Malone and slamming on all of his fans and shit, it's like, that's like, we can go all the way back to the time of the Beatles, where everyone's like, the Beatles are the lowest common denominator music, like it's just a fad, it won't last. And you can go through every decade from there on forth and sit there and say anything about the popular music of the culture of the times, and for the most part you're going to find people who are writing like, oh, this is, you know, popular because of X, Y, and Z, or this is the downfall of music because of X, Y, and Z, and the generation that supports it is going to ruin America or something.
Get off my lawn.
Yeah, and it's just like one of those things like where, you know, I kind of get tired of reading all this shit, and to kind of bring it back to Mark, it's like, you know, Creed has been one of those bands that's been fucking shit on for how long now? Almost probably 2 decades?
Yeah, it's like definitely a basic bro trope now. Like, oh, you still make fun of Creed in 2018, you know? But, like, people still do it. They're like, oh, it's so terrible, whatever. It's like, they're not even a fucking band anymore, man. Give it a rest.
Yeah.
Like, honestly. Like, and it's so easy to be negative. And, like, that's something that I still struggle with, man. Like, when I'm listening to these bands and I'm listening to, like, a whole career, you know, like in a week or something, it's like, it's very easy for me to immediately start shitting on it. And there's been times where I've gone through notes and I've revised and I've re-listened and I've, you know, gone and did something else that was distracting while listening to it or whatever, because I've come to find throughout all of this podcasting about music that, like, there's not a lot of stuff out there that I straight up hate. Like, there's a few things, but, like, that's just, you can chalk that up to just normal human taste. There are some things people like and don't like, but it's getting to the point where, like, it's the most amateur thing you can do to just go into something and shit on it. Like, you can find fault with anything. It really takes a good listening ear or a good awareness of your surroundings. Like you were talking about, John, about just being at the show and looking around at the people that are there and trying to figure out what they're getting out of it that maybe necessarily you're not getting out of it. And so I think it's actually harder to positively review something than it is to negatively review something. And I think it's getting worse and worse. Is like, that's my old guy statement of the podcast, is I think people are actually getting worse with it. There's so much more negativity out there than positivity. And, like, if you don't like something, that's fine. You could say I don't like it without being a dick about it.
Yeah, I think in light of the Greta Van Fleet thing, I just feel like we're in this pseudo, like,
1.6 out of 10. Give me a fucking break.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to say it's outrage culture, but I think we're finding that obviously negative things will be spread around a lot more than positive things. And case in point with that Greta Van Fleet article, it's like, okay, like, it shit on the band really hard. And you know, like I said, and its fans, and for all the things that, you know, they do and want to be and all this kind of stuff. And at the end of the day, it's like, it was more of a, you know, people commenting like, yeah, I agree with this, or, man, wow, this is crazy. Did you read this? Thoughts? Or, you know, it's just, like I said, bad news will spread so quickly that it's almost like this thing where it's like, is that what we're doing with our journalism because, you know, print media and so forth, and I don't necessarily want to say proper journalistic integrity is being sacrificed, but I feel like at a certain point it's almost like, you know, here we are, we have this Greta Van Fleet, you know, article go out, it goes viral basically, and then, you know, like I said, this Post Malone thing gets shared, and you know, like I said, people are kind of coming to the defense of the site that posted it, going like, oh, this is a reputable site, they don't post shit for clicks, blah 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 blah. Well, then someone apparently ended up finding out that the person who wrote this article used to work for Pitchfork or wherever the Greta Van Fleet one came from. And so it's like, okay, I didn't do any research, so that person may not, and it may just be misinformation somebody else is saying or whatever, but it is one of those things where it's almost like, well, this Greta Van Fleet thing was kind of, you know, they're a big band, everyone's talking about them, let's shoot them down a peg or three. Same with Post Malone. Post Malone now is everywhere. Well, let's fucking slag on him and just see what it stirs up. Like, write a good review, article, whatever, but the more negative you can be on it, like, probably will work best for us.
Well, yeah, the editorial is more entertaining overall, And that's really what people are going for now. And so if we talk about journalistic integrity, true journalism is devoid of your opinion. You are literally just reporting the news as it is.
Right.
Does All That Remains have a new album coming out? Yes. Actually, I just spoke with Phil. He said it's done.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
Without you offering any of your own comments or thoughts or anything like that. That's what journalism is. And unfortunately for our outrage culture, I'm going to go ahead and use the term even if you don't want to.
Okay.
But our outrage culture isn't interested in that shit. They're just interested in the thing that's the most entertaining and the thing that they can say to people to be like, oh, yeah, All That Remains, huge band. Their new album's already done, but you know what? It's probably already done because it's total shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, like, I guess somebody comes out and, like, gives them $5 and tells them that they're special. I don't know what happens after that, but that seems to be what people are after.
Well, and like the whole reason kind of, we've been talking at length about, more so me, been talking at length about just the prevailing culture of shit talking because we have a voice. We have a voice because we have the internet. We all have Facebook. We all have Twitter. We all have these platforms to speak on. Whether we have 5 people that follow us or we have millions that do, we all have this platform to voice our opinions more so than we ever have. And I forget who it was that was on recently that was like, oh, I wish I wish most people did not because it lessens the platform that the people who should have it and have something to say, they've worked very hard to get this platform, whereas now everyone has one and doesn't necessarily use it the right way. Quick comment on that. I just saw someone the other day comment. They shared something. It was on Twitter. It was a retweet, and someone goes, oh, it was Jordan Lewis, who used to play for Michigan. I think he plays for Dallas Cowboys now. Someone wrote a sports thing real quickly, wrote something, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like kind of shitty and no fact checking, no nothing, just an opinion or whatever. And Jordan goes, yo, you got a blue check mark. That means you influence people. You're an influencer to people on a large scale. Maybe you need to that means something. Don't just post bullshit. Like you should be above this. And like I thought about it for a minute, and it's like that's a completely different take on being verified and being an influencer than I've really ever thought of. And
yeah, that's interesting.
And so it's been very weird that like in the last week since I've done this conversation, while only a very minute part of this conversation talks about basically Creed being what people slacking on Creed has done to Mark in trying to be successful here in the States with Alter Bridge and his solo project while being unfazed by it everywhere else because of this internet culture we live in. It's interesting to think of a time that, like you were saying, Creed's not done anything in a long time, and there's more Alter Bridge and Tremonti records than there are Creed records. And yet, because of everything that was said about Creed, has impacted and affected Mark's ability to do things here in the States. And to me, that's fucking crazy.
It's super crazy, especially if you take Alter Bridge and compare him to Creed.
Yeah.
Like night and day.
Yeah.
Difference. I mean, Alter Bridge is in my opinion, 10 times the band that Creed was. And it's and even the Tremonti stuff, it's interesting. It's a lot more interesting than you would think it would be on paper. But the problem is the paper's skewed because it's throwing Creed out there every 3 seconds, ex-Creed guitar player, new solo project, blah, 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 blah. People just keep scrolling. But, you listen to the shit and you're like, this is really great. If it was called something else and it didn't have that association to it, it would be huge. And I think that's, what you were saying, a lot easier for him to do when he's not in the States because everybody in the States is just you were in Creed, so we don't give a shit. Even though, most people that don't like Creed really just don't like Scott Stapp. Yeah. It's and Mark Tremonti's over here well, I'm a musician and this is my livelihood. This is what I do for a living, Right. And it just blows my mind, that people wouldn't even give it a chance, really. But I think he handled that question as gracefully as he could have.
As we're wrapping up now, I would like to send a shout out to Alfonso for linking me up with a friend of his, Kyle Ewers, who is in 2 bands here in the Michigan area, A Monster Calls and Fear and Grace. And Kyle basically is a Mark Tremonti file fan,
Wow.
has the book, has even paid for a guitar lesson from Tremonti when he was on tour, is a big Tremonti fan, and as such, offered me some insight into a book that I wasn't able to get because it's sold out and they don't have them available. You can't find them online. So as someone who has read the book, was able to give me some insight into what the book was about, gave me some interesting questions to ask about that, and just some interesting Tremonti trivia as a whole. So again, I want to give a shout out to Kyle Ewers for helping me in preparation for this interview. Much appreciated. I have no qualms in saying sometimes if I'm not super well versed in someone's catalog, in whatever, case in point with Twisted or the King Gordy Ups, I will go talk to someone who I know is a big fan of those things, and I will sit down, have some drinks with them, and kind of go here's what I'm thinking. Is this a stupid question? If you
Dude,
heard,
that's how I got on this show.
that is
with
true,
the
actually.
Hopesfall thing.
Yeah. And I think that's a strength of mine, is realizing that I can't know everything as much as I would like to. But with all that said, we are going to end this episode out. So if you would like to follow Mark on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, you can basically find him all at Mark Tremonti. From there, search out Alter Bridge. Yeah, go to marktremonti.com as well. Keep up with all the touring information going on. As we said, currently on a European tour that'll wrap up most of this year. And as you heard in the interview, as soon as all this is wrapped up, already working on the new Alter Bridge record, which I gotta say, the live at Royal Albert Hall CD and some of the DVD that I've been able to see, fucking magic on that fucking thing. The crowd participation and the way that the band played, and with Mark saying that basically that was a one practice and then we're playing. Wow, it's amazing. So if you are a fan of Alter Bridge or whatever, please go check that out. You can hear it on iTunes. You can probably buy it. Alterbridge.com, I would assume, is the website. Go pick up the DVD. Looks really great. And Dan, where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter at DiscussMetalDan. You can follow me on Facebook under Daniel Terry. Very creative name, I know. And you can follow my other podcast, Discography Discussion, at DiscussMetal.com. That's it. I don't see anybody else following me anywhere else. Don't go to my Pornhub. Don't go to any of that stuff.
And if you would like to keep up with our show sponsors, Moshpit Nation, you can find them on moshpitnation.com. Facebook is Moshpit Nation West, capital M-I. Twitter and Instagram are simply Moshpit Nation. And if you would like to keep up with our show sponsor, The Bean Bastard, you can at thebeanbastard.com. Facebook and Instagram are simply The Bean Bastard. And if you would like to keep up with us over here at the podcast, you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at John's Entitled Podcast. Shout out to the 6 or 7 recent subscribers over on YouTube and the constant comments that people are leaving on the latest episodes. Greatly appreciated. Love hearing conversation and feedback. So let's keep that going. Comment on the Facebook pages, comment on Instagram, wherever you are finding the podcast. Leave comments, rate, review, and subscribe. Dan will give you a real quick explanation as to why that matters.
Yeah, rating, reviewing, and subscribing really matters because every single thing that we do with this podcast is monitored by the platform that we're posted on. So I think with John's, it's SoundCloud, but also on Apple Podcasts and sites like that. Basically anywhere where you're listening to the podcast, they keep track of all that stuff. They keep track of how many reviews we get, and they keep track of how many subscribers we have. And what they do with that is if a podcast starts to seem successful, which in their eyes, those numbers are what makes it successful, they'll start recommending our podcast to people that aren't listening to it. And that's what we want. That's one of the ways that we can grow, and it is absolutely the best free option for you to help us out. We also have some paid options, too, if you're into that.
And speaking of those paid options, if you would like to support us monetarily, you can go to patreon.com/John's Entitled Podcast. And we got a couple of bonus episodes. Dan's been busy with work, and so that's kind of slowed down our output of extra bonus content, but $2 unlocks all of that, and we'll also get you a shout out on the episode. So once again, shout out to our patron Sarah Schneider for donating to the podcast, and hopefully you're enjoying those episodes. And we have a few already in mind for our next handful, but like I said, Dan's been super busy making the dineros over on his end. And if you would also like to support us a different way monetarily, if you would like to be a show sponsor, email us, johnsentitlepod@gmail.com, and we can discuss rates and all that kind of stuff. And without further ado, we're going to end this episode as we always do with a song. And as you heard Mark say, he wanted me to play it out to the title track off of his newest record, A Dying Machine, out now via Napalm Records. So we are going to end it to A Dying Machine, and we will talk to you next time.